think of all this before? You're so careless. We might have asked Miss La Creevy to keep us company, or borrowed a dog, or 1,000 things. But it always was the way, and was just the same with your poor dear father. Unless I thought of everything.' This was Mrs. Nickleby's usual commencement of a general lamentation, running through a dozen or so of complicated sentences addressed to nobody in particular, and into which she now launched until her breath was exhausted. Newman appeared not to hear these remarks, but preceded them to a couple of rooms on the first floor, which some kind of attempt had been made to render habitable. In one were a few chairs, a table, an old hearthrug, and some faded baize, and a fire was ready laid in the grate. In the other stood an old tent bedstead, and a few scanty articles of chamber furniture. 'Well, my dear,' said Mrs. Nickleby, trying to be pleased, 'now isn't this thoughtful and considerate of your uncle? Why, we should not have had anything but the bed we bought yesterday to lie down upon, if it hadn't been for his thoughtfulness.' 'Very kind indeed,' replied Kate, looking round. Newman Noggs did not say that he had hunted up the old furniture they saw, from attic and cellar, or that he had taken in the halfpennyworth of milk for tea that stood upon a shelf, or filled the rusty kettle on the hob, or collected the wood chips from the wharf, or begged the coals. But the notion of Ralph Nickleby having directed it to be done tickled his fancy so much, that he could not refrain from cracking all his 10 fingers in succession; at which performance Mrs. Nickleby was rather startled at first, but supposing it to be in some remote manner connected with the gout, did not remark upon. 'We need detain you no longer, I think,' said Kate. 'Is there nothing I can do?' asked Newman. 'Nothing, thank you,' rejoined Miss Nickleby. 'Perhaps, my dear, Mr. Noggs would like to drink our healths,' said Mrs. Nickleby, fumbling in her reticule for some small coin. 'I think, mama,' said Kate, hesitating, and remarking Newman's averted face, 'you would hurt his feelings if you offered it.' Newman Noggs, bowing to the young lady more like a gentleman than the miserable wretch he seemed, placed his hand upon his breast, and pausing for a moment, with the air of a man who struggles to speak, but is uncertain what to say, quitted the room. As the jarring echoes of the heavy house door closing on its latch reverberated dismally through the building, Kate felt half tempted to call him back and beg him to remain a little while, but she was ashamed to own her fears, and Newman Noggs was on his road homewards. Chapter 11